Our next speaker is going to be Amanda Bilek. She is the Senior Public Policy Director for the Minnesota Corn Growers. And the format will be the same. She'll speak for slightly less than half an hour and then take questions at the end through either the Q&A or the chat section of your screen. Go ahead, Amanda.
Great, thanks, Gary. So I believe that my slides are up, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So thanks for having me. Great to follow Joe as well. We work really in close partnership with the Minnesota soybean growers as well as with the Minnesota wheat growers and all the ag groups to advance policies that can help to benefit all of our members and farmers in Minnesota broadly. So I'm just going to follow up a little bit with some of the stuff that Joe talked about with the election, and then really kind of get into actually this session that started last week and really try to provide a little bit of insight on what we might be able to expect. But first, a little bit kind of about me. So I've been with the corn growers for about 3.5 years. I'm originally from the Todd-Wadena area of Minnesota. And have worked on public policy and legislative affairs for about 15 years in a couple different capacities before joining Minnesota Corn. So just to start right off about how is this going to work? As Joe mentioned in his presentation, Minnesota is the only divided legislature in the US. Having that split party control, as Joe mentioned, it does create some challenges, but also creates a lot of opportunities. There have been a lot of things that we have advanced in the past collectively as agriculture under divided legislature, divided government. The very last question was a little bit about capital security, but then also how to still be effective in this kind of new virtual environment that we have been working with the last several months through all the different special sessions, but also as we gear up for the regular session this year. Every session is always a little unique, but the 2021 session is really unlike anything that we have experienced before, or I have ever experienced before in my career working on state public policy. The picture that's here is, the Capitol building and the grounds. They are closed to members of the public, and that does include lobbyists. Some legislative staff, such as nonpartisan research and the reviser, are working remotely. Caucus staff for the House or Senate, Republicans and Democrats, do have limited staff in person on a limited basis. And so what that means is that the House of Representatives is going to be doing their committee meetings, their floor sessions, and all of these individual legislator meetings completely virtual, either via Zoom or a different online platform. And when it comes to the floor sessions, there's even limited attendance by certain members during those floor sessions. The Senate has a little bit more of a hybrid approach, but still is largely virtual. They have a few more people that are there sort of in person during the floor sessions in particular, but in different rooms to maintain some social distance. And committee meetings are mostly going to be virtual. They will be trying a little bit of a hybrid approach, being able to kind of distance out in some of the rooms that are available in the Capitol complex for members to attend in person. Maybe later in session, we might see some in-person testimony, perhaps. But definitely for the first part of session, those individual legislator meetings are going to be virtual, as well as probably most of the committee hearings as well. And what that means for farm groups is we are also conducting our advocacy efforts, largely virtual environment. As Joe said, and as I've been doing the last couple of weeks, and even at the end of session, it's a lot of text, it's a lot of phone calls, it's a lot of Zoom meetings, and a lot of emails, adapting to being able to really sort of lobby and to still be that effective voice for our members in this different environment. Next, I just kind of want to run through some of the faces that Minnesota ag lobbyists and farm groups are going to be focused on staying in contact with over this virtual session. So looking first at the House and kind of at the top leadership, this is really kind of unchanged from last session. As Joe was talking about with the election results, there is a little bit of narrowing for the DFL majority. Republicans did pick up some seats. So there's a narrower majority for the DFL in the House, but Melissa Hortman will continue to be the speaker from Brooklyn Park, so a suburb of the Twin Cities. Also, Majority Leader Winkler is also kind of from a suburban area. and he was majority leader last year. And then over on the minority side, Kurt Dout from Crown is the minority leader again this year, along with the deputy minority leader. There has been a few different assistant majority and minority leaders, but the top 4 caucus leaders are the same as last session. So looking a little bit at the committee leadership, as Joe mentioned during the election, one of the losses for agriculture and for the legislature was Jean Poppy, who had been the chair of the Agriculture and Food Policy and Finance Committee last legislative session. The new chair is Mike Sundin for the Agriculture, Finance, and Policy Committee. He's from the ESCO area, kind of the Carleton, Kanabec counties of Minnesota, sort of northeast area. Chair Sundin does have a little bit of ag background. He grew up on a dairy farm. He does have several farms in his district, but not as much corn or soybean production. And so I know that groups have been reaching out to him to talk a little bit about some of the issues around production agriculture, kind of taking an opportunity to do a little bit of education. On the ethanol side and the biofuel side, Chair Sundin has expressed an interest in getting out to an ethanol plant as soon as he can. So we're working to help to kind of facilitate one of those tours and to help build some of that education. Another committee that agriculture has gotten a lot more involved with in the last decade in particular is really on the environment and natural resources side. This committee is responsible for the budgets and policy related to the Pollution Control Agency, the Department of Natural Resources, Bowser, and the chair of that committee is Rick Hansen from South St. Paul. He was chair in the last legislative session, and he'll be chair again. This is where Joe had kind of talked about some of the defense work we're going to be doing around sort of crop protection tools in particular. We'll interface with this committee a lot and the committee leadership there. And then on the taxes side, Paul Morcourt from Northern Minnesota returns as the tax chair this year. Representative Morcourt has been a strong proponent of a lot of the tax policy gains that have happened for farmers over the last legislative session, in particular the ag to school credit, the increase in the ag to school credit, as well as Section 179 conformity. And so having him in that leadership role with the tax committee chair helps to protect some of the gains that we have made in tax policy for farmers in the last legislative session. There is a new property tax chair, property tax division, in Cheryl Yawakim from the Hopkins area. And so there'll be a little bit of education outreach there with Chair Yawakim in the area of property taxes, which also has a big impact on farmers. Just looking at a couple more committees in the House. The Legacy Committee, this is the committee that kind of oversees and starts to put together, taking some of the recommendations from the various advisory groups that are responsible for kind of developing the recommendations for that constitutionally dedicated money that is for clean water and parks and trails and land acquisition and the arts. The chair of that committee last session and chair again will be Leon Lilly from White Bear Lake area. And then over on transportation, because transportation funding is really important as well for agriculture and making sure that we've got a robust road and bridge infrastructure, is Frank Hornstein. He's been chair of the transportation committee in the past, and he's from Minneapolis. Just looking at the leadership a little bit over on the Senate side, a few new faces moving into leadership here, but with the exception of Majority Leader Gazelka, he was Majority Leader last session and will maintain being the Majority Leader as well this year. And from the Nisswa, sort of Little Falls area where my parents still live, Senator Gazelka is the senator for my parents' farm in central Minnesota. And then familiar face from your area for a lot of the growers on this webinar, Senator Mark Johnson was elected as a deputy majority leader in the Senate Republican caucus. And really, strong proponent of a lot of agriculture policy for farmers. And so having him in this role is fantastic. The previous deputy majority leader, Michelle Benson, was also, a really strong proponent of agriculture and agriculture-related policy and representing the interests of farmers. As Joe mentioned, before the last legislative session in 2020, there was a change in the Dfl Minority Leader with Susan Kent being elected and then Tom Bach losing that minority leader position, and now resulting in Senator Bach and then Senator Tomassoni forming an independent caucus in the Senate, and so effectively sort of leaving or having the breakout a little bit, like 34 Republicans to 31 Democrats, and then 2 independent members who mostly are going to be voting and probably caucusing with the Republican majority. Again, just looking at the committee leadership over in the Senate, Senator Westrom was chair of the Agriculture Finance Committee last year. This session, finance and policy has been combined into one committee over in the Senate. It's Agriculture and Rural Development. Before, this committee also had jurisdiction over housing. But it's now entirely focused on ag and rural development policy and finance issues, with Senator Westrom as the chair there. And then over on the environment side, no changes for the committee leadership from last legislative session. There is an Environment and Natural Resources Policy Committee as well as Legacy Finance, and that is chaired by Senator Kari Rood from Breezy Point. And then on the Environment and Natural Resources Finance side, Bill Ingerbitsen returns as chair of that committee from the Alexandria area. And then finally, just looking at taxes, there is a new tax chair from Rochester, Senator Carla Nelson. Senator Chamberlain was the tax chair in the last session, and Senator Chamberlain has moved over to education. Senator Chamberlain and Nelson sort of swapped committee chair duties for this upcoming session, or this session that we're currently in. And Senator Nelson has been also a strong proponent of agriculture and agriculture-related tax issues and policy issues. And then Senator Weber, who is also a strong champion of agriculture, is chairing a property tax division or subcommittee over in the Senate. And as an assessor and having some other experience like that, he's uniquely suited to really be a strong proponent on property tax issues for farmers as well in this role. And then on the transportation side, Senator Scott Newman of Hutchinson is returning as the chair for the Transportation Policy Finance Committee. So just want to get into some of the issues for the legislature. We'll also spend a little bit of time talking about sort of the administration. Joe touched on a couple issues that are important to agriculture where we have some interface with the administration. I'm just going to dig into that a little bit more. So, you know, the big work of session for this year is really going to be passing a two-year state budget. I have an error on my slide. It should be saying there's a projected $1.3 billion deficit for the next biennium. This did improve a little bit from a forecast before. It was projected to be a much larger deficit, but it's also a little uncertain what the longer term budget outlook is going to look like when it relates especially to trying to look at economic recovery and other things related to COVID-19. And so I think there's hesitancy overall in really sort of doing anything big when it comes to budgeting or looking at any new spending. It's going to be a very conservative look at sort of budgeting, especially with some of the volatile pieces that are out there in the economy. Governor Walz will be putting forward a proposed budget after a revised forecast, and that will kind of get into the heart of starting to work for the work of session. And starting to put together that budget for the next 2 years. You know, the other big issues that the legislature will be grappling with is going to be additional things with COVID-19 and any additional response measures that the legislature might need to pass. It also has some interaction between what might happen at the federal level, if there's going to be additional sort of COVID relief or aid, is some of that going to flow down to the states? How will that impact the state finances? And then, of course, there's a large discussion happening around the emergency powers and in the executive branch, what the legislative role needs to look like in responding to COVID-19. And then, of course, there will be a focus on economic recovery coming out of COVID, especially as the vaccines and other things start to roll out over the next couple of months. So just on the executive branch side, because you know one of the next big sort of benchmarks in session will be a revised forecast that will be used to help assemble that budget, and then also have the proposal from Governor Walz. So you know the two commissioners that are really responsible or working pretty closely on overseeing a lot of the state budget piece is Commissioner Jim Schulwater from the Department of Management and Budget. His agency is responsible for those forecasts. And then, taxes, because it's such an important aspect of the work that we do as ag groups with our advocacy efforts. A lot of interaction with the Department of Revenue. There's a new commissioner this year, Commissioner Bowerly, previously served in that role, both for the Walz administration, but also the Dayton administration, left that position. Robert Dottie is the commissioner for the Department of Revenue now. He was previously an assistant commissioner. And with the Department of Revenue, a lot of the tax pieces that we've worked on in the past continue to have some interaction with the Department of Revenue when it comes to property tax, the ag to school credit, Section 179 conformity, and then there's this beginning farmer tax credit, which is administered by the Department of Agriculture, but has some interaction with the Department of Revenue as well. Some other issues that are really important to agriculture that interface with the different agencies in the administration, starting, with the Department of Agriculture and Commissioner Peterson, who is a strong ally of agriculture within the Walz administration, and a strong voice for the interests of farmers within the administration. His agency, of course, has a lot of different aspects that they oversee and administer that impact agriculture. Joe talks a little bit about some of the pesticide and sort of pieces. Also, that they're responsible for the regulation of commercial fertilizer. There's also support that they have for just production agriculture as well as value-added agriculture. They oversaw and kind of administered this Governor's Council on Biofuels, which was making recommendations on how the state could expand the use of ethanol and biodiesel in our transportation fuel supply. Looking over at the Department of Natural Resources with Commissioner Stroman, that agency is responsible for issuing some irrigation permits. One of the things that has also been controversial has been around like the buffer law. And the DNR is responsible for some of these maps, buffer protection maps, but in particular, also the other piece of it is looking at a public waters inventory, which is used to determine where the buffer acres need to be in compliance with the law. There was a proposal by the DNR last fall that was actually going to put back in some public waters or put back in some miles of stream and others into the public waters inventory in Renville County. These were previously removed in 2016, 2017 through a project looking at errors that were on the public waters inventory. So this could also be precedent setting in an agency pulling back in waters to the public waters inventory and then making them then have to be in compliance with the buffer law, an issue that a lot of ag groups commented on, we will continue to be working on. And then as Joe mentioned, there's some different DNR activities related to pesticides and wildlife, both with seed spills, but then also looking at testing of deer spleens and looking at pesticide detection. And this could result potentially in different legislative proposals. Over at the Pollution Control Agency with Commissioner Bishop, and this responsible does a lot of the permit, this agency does the permitting for livestock and different agriculture processing facilities. And then one of the things that the PCA has proposed is adopting these California vehicle emission standards, a low emission vehicle standard and a zero emission vehicle standard. In effect, this would probably result in Minnesota having emission standards that are set by the state of California. There's going to be an impact on agriculture, an impact on biofuels, trying to fully understand and assess that, but then also raising concerns and working with our partners in the legislature to help raise some of the issues that need to be talking to the PCA about as they kind of consider this and move towards this rulemaking process. And then PCA is also taking a really active role in working with the governor's subcabinet on climate change and coming up with different proposals there as well. And things to really be guarding against to make sure that agriculture is looked at as a way that can help provide an opportunity to reduce emissions and not an opportunity for passing new sort of top-down heavy regulations on agriculture and on the state farmers. And then just finally at the Department of Transportation, this agency is also looks at administering some of the transportation funding for roads and bridges. And one thing that we've been keeping our eye on is recently the Department of Transportation also finalized some recommendations from the Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council. And a lot of those recommendations related to the future of transportation have to do with electric vehicles. And the more electric vehicles that we have on the road can decrease the market, of course, for ethanol and biodiesel, which is why sort of looking at trying to increase the amount of biodiesel and ethanol content in our transportation fuel supply is important, so that for the internal combustion engines that are on the road, they can be using higher blends of ethanol. Joe, I touched on a couple of these issues, but these are a lot of the issues that a lot of the ag groups are going to be working kind of collectively on this upcoming legislative session. In particular, there's a strong interest in really wanting to protect some of the tax policy gains that were made in the last session, and the ag to school credit is set to have a little bit of a phased in increase to move to 60%. For that ag to school credit, and so we want to make sure that that actually does happen and continues to provide some tax relief for farmers in areas where they have one of those school bond credits or school bond referendums that are passing. And then a hard-fought tax win from the 5th special session was finally getting to state conformity on Section 179. That's also supported by the business community as well. And so we're going to be, taking advantage of also thanking legislators who helped to support that and help to advocate for that that conformity that was really needed for agriculture and small businesses. And then, really wanting to make sure that funding for agriculture research and investment is robust as possible and sort of a projected deficit type of budget environment. But as Joe mentioned, the ag budget is a very small portion of the overall state budget, and agriculture is the 2nd largest economic driver in Minnesota. Other issues that are important to agriculture as well as to rural communities relate to healthcare and the cost of insurance, the access to care and quality care has been something that has been raising in prominence for a lot of farmers all across the state. Transportation, need to make sure that we've got robust funding as much as possible to improve road and bridge infrastructure that will help farmers efficiently move products to market. There could be additional transportation regulations that we want to be looking at. I know one area that has been talked about in the past a lot that we've worked on is truck weights, probably something that will continue to sort of be worked on. And then of course, broadband, especially with COVID-19, that really showed the need of making sure that there's good connections all across Minnesota, especially in rural areas, and providing some reliability as well. And as I mentioned, especially in the House and probably in the administration, we're going to be looking at some different legislation related to climate change. From agriculture's perspective, want to really make sure that those efforts are focused more on voluntary efforts, maybe things that help to build soil health, as opposed to new sort of regulation. And then, of course, there's always going to be some defense that we need to play as ag groups. Know that there's going to be probably some proposals related to crop protection tools, trying to limit those, propose to limit those. In the interest of protecting pollinator health and other pieces. So agriculture will be playing our role in helping to defend against those things and make sure that farmers still have access to the tools that they need to grow the crops for their operations. There could be new things related to additional proposals related to environmental regulation or water quality. In the past, PCA has had a proposal around increasing some of these water permitting fees. Several of these issues are not likely to be taken up by the Republican Senate, providing a little bit of a backstop there, but we still need to do our work to advocate for why, play some defense on these issues. And then, as I mentioned, there could be other energy proposals that impact agriculture, in particular, these California vehicle emission rules. And just want to close by talking a little bit about, in addition to some of the other policy issues broadly, we have a lot of shared priorities along with all the other ag groups with soybean growers and Farm Bureau and wheat growers. But one of the things that we are really kind of our top priority for this next legislative session, we launched this last year at our annual meeting in January, is the Better Fuel Initiative. This initiative, it promotes the adoption of state policies, raises awareness to drive research and then increase infrastructure with the aim to meet environmental goals through the increased use of biofuels. The Better Fuel Initiative, it supports grassroots outreach to increase awareness around the state around biofuels, as well as to grow ethanol infrastructure throughout the state, which can also increase accessibility for consumers to be able to use a higher blend of ethanol when they fill up their vehicles. And the policy that we started working on last year that we had introduced and had some kind of momentum as we were getting into March, and then when the legislature went largely virtual, was really looking at statewide E15, and this is an increase in Minnesota's existing biofuel standard. Minnesota was the first state to require a 10% blend of ethanol in our gasoline that went statewide in 2003. It was actually first adopted 1997. And Minnesota could be the first state to sort of move from this 10 to 15% biofuel standard, having E15 offered statewide. This policy would add value to the ethanol and corn that was already produced in Minnesota. And it would utilize about 130 million gallons of the nearly 1 billion gallons we already produce of ethanol in the state. We know that with our experience last legislative session, there's going to be a strong push by the oil interests to make sure that this 5% increase, this like 5% of their market share is preserved in the transportation market. And so we're going to need the help of all of our members and those are interested in wanting to support this to really help get this initiative across the finish line this next legislative session. The other thing that helps is this was a recommendation coming out of the Governor's Council on Biofuels. So we are expecting and we're hoping that there's going to be some strong leadership from the administration on this initiative as well. But we've really been out front. The corn growers have been out front in helping to set this as a top priority for our association and for corn farmers across the state, and would invite you to help to support this initiative as well by talking to your legislator about it. We have a variety of materials I'd be happy to send you. We also have a action alert system. If you want to sign up for those action alerts, you can text MCGA to 50457, and then you'll get sort of the calls to action. And if you want to discuss more or have questions about it, you of course can contact me and I'd be happy to follow up with some materials. So thanks so much. I'm happy to answer some questions.